So welcome to the next episode of Techman Does Dynamics.
Talks Dynamics.
Talks Dynamics.
That's fine, we can do Dynamics together.
Get the name right, that's a good start, isn't it? Oh wow. Oh, that's why it's fun doing it with you three. No. Leave it in. Everybody knows I get everything wrong anyway, so what the hell. Over a year ago, we did an episode called Getting App Ready, which was about the process of converting to the new apps and all the rest of it. And I think, Liam, it's had more views than all the rest of them put together, or something silly.
I don't know if it's had more views than that, because the last few do seem to have gone through the roof. But what it has been, it's been a regular one that gets watched. So people are obviously finding some use in it. A lot of the time we'll release something that's topical or talking about a new release. Once that window's passed, people aren't going to rewatch it. But with this one, it keeps going back.
Getting App Ready is, as we probably said on that podcast, is not a 5-minute job, and it is a multi-year job, isn't it?
It's worth us covering again, because we have done so much more.
We've learned
in the last 12 months that we know more.
So just to define what this is people who are on historic NAV, Business Central, with CAL modifications, who want to, who've now reached the point where they can't upgrade anymore, most of them, if they're on BC14. And in order to move to Business Central 20 now, they've got to have all of their customizations as apps rather than CAL object modifications. So it's that whole process of getting ready for the new world and getting in a position where you can upgrade, which is quite long for people who've had NAV for 15, 20 years, as some of our customers had, and they've had customizations added on top of customizations for the last 15 years, change request after change request. Unpicking all of that and transferring it into apps is not a simple.
Well, people's businesses will have changed as well over the last 10, 15 years. So things that were of vital importance 10 years ago maybe aren't so much anymore, but those customizations will still be there, because nobody would have took them out, because nobody ever tidies anything up.
And in
any sense.
But how does a customer know what customizations they
So we've got a defined process that we go through now called the App Ready process, where we will go through and we will pull out the modification. We've got a set of tools that we can use to compare, because actually you can go through and you can see what objects are modified, but actually a modification might be that someone's moved a field on a form, or it might be a whole complex, but it will still just show as modified.
And actually the modification flag, if you've gone in, put a customization in there and then take it out again, the modified flag still is there. So,
but also some partners take the modified flag off, which means that even where objects have been modified, it looks like they haven't. So we've got a process that we can run that will compare your objects against a standard set of objects, so we can pull out exactly what modifications have been made, and we then kind of try and group them together, whether that's by kind of, if you remember when you had the FDDs done in your original project, it might be a reference number, it might be, if it's more recent, a CR number that pulls it all together to see what documentation we've got that sits behind it. And we've also got some tools that will help us define what's actually being used. So for example, if a report's being run, if a code unit is being called at any point, so we can kind of identify what is being used in the system. Because the problem is a lot of our customers don't know what's modified and what's standard.
Well, it was modified 5 years before they arrived at that particular organisation.
Yeah, well, customers will say, our business process is really standard, it's really simple, we didn't really need any customisation. And then you find that actually they've had virtually every page modified, every table's got extra fields hanging off it. So then once we've gone through that step to see exactly what modifications are there, it's then a case of what is still needed going forward. So that kind of comes into probably 3 categories. So one, it's needed and it's still needed. So that will go on the list of changes to be transfers. But then that's another we'll come to that in a minute. It will be that was customised, but it's now available as standard, either out of the box or just by slightly modifying your process, you can just use standard. So that goes in in the bin effectively, but we still have to go through the process of explaining to the customer.
And maybe moving the data out of what was the custom field into the standard field. The ship-to code on the default ship-to code on the customer is a classic for that.
Yeah.
Where we put that into multiple customers because they needed it, and then suddenly Microsoft introduce it, but they introduce it as in one of the standard fields, and you've got to understand that that's got to be migrated. So that's a one-off process, isn't it? So there's a lot of those kind of one-off processes to move stuff around.
And then the third one is just customizations that actually you don't need it all anymore, and they can just go along probably with the data that's in them. If there's any data, if you don't need that field, and you don't need the data in it, and that data's all out of date because no one's touched it for 10 years, then they can probably go. So there's kind of three categories. Once you've got the list of things that are needed going forward, then it's a case of converting those, to deciding how they're going to be converted to apps. Now, if anybody says to you that they'll just create one app called custom code and dump it all in there, then that is not the right approach at all. Neither necessarily is taking each individual mod reference, each individual CR reference, and converting them one by one. Really, it takes a consultant and a solution architect to look at it and say, right, how should we structure these changes? So maybe we have one app for sales order customizations, one app for warehouse customizations. It might be that it goes
and you
completely
need to
differently.
group it properly, because if the custom field, for instance, ends up on your sales invoice, okay, then you can't. You need to move the whole set. So in effect, because a field that you put into an app can't be seen by the underlying CAL, the original object anymore. So you need to understand what we call the dependency chain of saying, okay, this needs it, this needs it, this needs it, and move all of those together rather than you can't move one now and the rest later.
So there's an element of consulting and development skill that goes into defining how that should be built. And then once that's done, then it's a decision as to whether you do the actual conversion to apps as an ongoing process or as a big bang, and that depends where you are on what version you're currently on. So if you're currently on BC 14, then you can probably do it as a gradual process. So you can replace your old code with an extension and delete the old code in the current version. And then once you've got rid of all that old cal code, then you can think about upgrading. So if you're not yet on BC 14, then you can't do that. You're only up because we can no longer cut a license for BC 14. So if you're on NAV 15, 17, 18, then your only choice is to get all of that ready and go straight to the latest version, which at the moment is BC 20.
And to be fair, though that's a bigger piece of work to do now, I would say if you're not on the progress of moving to apps, I would probably think about a re-implementation or a full migration through that full version. Going to 14 now, I would say...
Well, you can't.
I know you can't, but I'm also saying you shouldn't, because probably we're only a couple of years from BC 14 going out.
It's like 18 months, isn't it?
Yeah, it's coming around rapidly.
By the time you did, if you've got a big system, by the time you've done
get
it,
there,
pretty much
you might be out of it.
So in terms of data, you've got in terms of getting from, let's say you're on NAV 2017 and you want to get to BC 2021 on SaaS or on premise, doesn't actually make any difference. You kind of got some different approaches that you can take. You could re-implement completely. So you could basically say, let's just forget what we've got, spin up a completely standard,
move the master data,
chart of accounts, customers, vendors, opening balances. So that's what we'd call a re-implementation completely. You can just take data, so you can say forget all my code, and you can just take all of your data, so you have a nice clean new version with data.
It's what you said earlier about you lose the custom fields.
However, if you've got data in custom fields, you've either got to find somewhere new to put it or lose it.
And that migrating the data, actually, because if you move it from, if you move it into an app, so you put a custom field into an app, in effect that shouldn't point to the original field in your custom CAL. So one of the big learnings, I think, that is a very, very, very strong recommendation is that when you write the apps, don't write them on top of your custom objects. Okay, because you will introduce a dependency
God,
to one of the old customizations, which has been done too many times. And so what you need to do is you need to write your apps on top of a clean BC14, because that's what they're going to have to work on top of eventually if you want them to work. Yeah. If you use your custom object set, your CAL objects, and you use the symbols from those custom objects, then probably you're going to have to do the app ready process twice. Okay, so that's bad news. So make sure your developers are doing it on top of, and they'll moan a little bit around that, because it means they'll probably have to create more data to do their testing process, etc., than they would do if they were using it on top of a copy, the dev database in effect that they've traditionally had. But it does mean you need to be clean. The other thing I would say from that, not all BC14s are the same. So what do I mean by that? I mean that when you get into the later CUs of BC14, they've got more events. Microsoft, as they pushed out the new, the cumulative updates, they've added events into those cumulative updates going through the piece. Yeah. So if the developer goes and downloads the latest BC14 Docker image and does it against the latest CU, okay, when you actually come to implement that app back on the earlier CU that you've upgraded to, it won't work. Now that gives you a different dilemma. Do you do a CU update in your 14 to get your 14 up to date so it's closer to the BC20 that you're eventually hope to head for, or do you re-engineer then to go through? So just make sure that those developers that are doing your app development for any customizations that you want to keep are doing it on a BC14 CU that you're using, and it's a clean one. It doesn't have any underlying customizations. You can install the other apps that you've already built. That's fine. So have a dependency on the apps that you've already got, because you're going to take those apps to BC20. The CAL customizations, you're not. So make sure that you're orphaning them as rapidly as possible. And that's the next thing I would say is, once you've done that app, once that app is in and work, you've tested it and it works, in effect, remove the customizations from CAL, because if you leave them in there's a chance they'll get referenced, and that will, you're back to square one then. Yeah. Which is a real, that's not a great thing to find out later in the process of, this reference is it. I still need it.
If somebody hasn't moved their license back in September 21, I think it was, to BC14, you can still upgrade though, can't you? It's not going to stop you from upgrading, because we can still do it as a single chunk process. But obviously, it's going to take some testing and a bit more work to do.
Yes, but you go to 20.
Yeah, I think so that's the third option, is that you just do a like for like upgrade. Obviously, it's like for like because you would have to convert your cloud extensions as part of the process, but.
We may go through BC14.
It's time and cost.
That's why you do the app ready analysis, because you look how much code we've got to take, how much data we've got to take, and actually it might be that the right answer is none of it, and a fresh start. Everybody likes the benefit of hindsight, and I think there's not many of our customers that wouldn't say, if we were going to implement this again, we would do it this way.
Yeah, I think most tend to lose some or a lot of their customizations.
Yeah.
When you've done that app or the customization analysis, how many times do you go to App Source and see if something's in there? Is that something we do?
Well, yeah, we do. But certainly we will first of all look to see if it can be replaced by standard, because that's obviously the cheapest and easiest way. Then we'll look at App Source and see if there's anything that we can use there, but also our own additions, code that we've got that we can reuse, that isn't just used by one customer but used by multiple customers, and therefore will it is a kind of a lower cost of ownership for the customer, because it's pre-done, it's tested, it's proven, and it's not custom just to them. It's easy to support.
I think the App Source thing is interesting. So there's App Source entries that we use all the time. So they're on our standard list, if you like. So Aberkeon's one. If it's intercompany, we'll probably go that route. There's a bunch of others as well. And so those, actually, everybody knows pretty much what they do and how they work and so on. So if we go in and we see some customization that does that, we'll go, actually, here's the standard app that does that. The number of times, you go search AppSource and you come up with a completely new ISV that you've never heard of before and does it. It depends how specific it is. So what do I mean by that? I mean, like, if it's something that is a very one-off that you've not seen before, you'll take a one-off chance. But AppSource is maturing. I think there's a hell of a lot of extensions in AppSource, and you look at them and actually you install them, you try and use them, you struggle to get your head around them a little bit, and that comes down then to the quality of the ISV, I think, of how quickly you can find out how good the documentation is and so on. It's not just finding something in AppSource that says we do this.
Yeah.
It's also about, like, if I'm going to build a long-term dependency on this, I want to be very sure that I can depend on not just the app, but the people who've built it and all the backup around that, because I think
don't become reliant on something that isn't reliable.
Most partners now have had a bad ISV experience through AppSource as well as good ones, and that you learn from that.
But if we can use tried and tested code to meet a requirement, then we will, as opposed to custom.
And 12 months ago, when we recorded this, there was probably about 1,000 apps on AppSource. There's about 2.5 plus.
Yeah,
that's the last. It's going up daily, isn't it? It's going up daily.
That's
our
about 3
own
months ago.
Additions, things that we do that fill. Time and time again, we come up against the same little gaps, and every customer wants them. Things like surcharges, rebates, things that lots of our customers need that aren't catered for by the standard product. So we've got code that we have that we can reuse for those customers. So it's not they're not starting from scratch.
Surcharges with all the price increases that inflation going mad recently has just been a hot topic with customers, isn't it? So having a solution where we've got all the documentation, we can drop it in. That's where apps really do work.
Yeah. So once that process is done and you've decided which of the three, so app ready process, then you decide clean start, data only, or full on upgrade, kind of your three options. Then it's a case of getting, and if you're on BC14, you can do a bit of a hybrid and you can do it gradually. If you're on an older version, then it's kind of a one-step process. Now, I personally wouldn't recommend you try and do major process re-engineering or changes to the system as part of that process. I would do that as almost a phase 2. So I would get, rather than overcomplicating the kind of app ready project, I would almost stop at the other developments.
Yeah, how often does that happen?
It did. I think that if you focus on getting that done first and then do the next stage. So if you wanted to add on another ISV or you wanted to redevelop part of the system, maybe do that as a secondary phase. Do that piece of work first. It's difficult enough to get people bought into testing it and to, your users have got to adapt to a new client, the web client. If you're on NAV 15, 17, 18, they're going to have to adapt to the new web client. You don't necessarily. They're going to have to learn.
Well, even if you're on BC14, new people who start in your organisation, get them using the web client, because yes, I know we'll all sit there and say you can't make the columns wider and a few other things, but actually it's going to be a hell of a lot easier than learning the Windows client.
Yeah, if you're on BC14, then adopting the web client certainly for some users.
It works.
Then definitely do that. If you're not, then you can't do that.
And go through that pain because 4 or 5 weeks after they've started using the web client, they'll say, actually, this is not too bad. This is okay.
100%.
The first week, they'll bitch like hell about it, but
it's like
go through that pain. You will. It's coming. So
my recommendation would be that you do it as a project on its own and then add to it afterwards, rather than
I think the recommendation is try and make the individual steps as small as possible. I think and actually this is an all-up recommendation for any kind of customization work or whatever that you're doing. Once you're live, have do smaller steps more frequently rather than bundling a whole bunch of changes. And what tends to happen is everybody starts out with that intention is, but I need this, but I need this, but I need this. And suddenly the whole batch of changes have got huge, and then everybody goes, oh, this is really risky, and we're not quite sure how well this is going to work.
A little bit longer.
We must do some more testing. We must do some more
everyone will have heard me
quality
preach and
assurance.
say, make it a sprint, not a marathon, or even a slow, laboured jog. A sprint.
Yes, but finish the sprint, have a couple of breaths, and then do the next sprint.
Yeah.
It's you will achieve more. You will get further actually by doing that than your slow laboured jog that's for a huge batch of changes. So I think especially in the app ready process, when maybe you're mixing some mandatory business change in amongst it, you keep them small, kind of 3-4 week, 6 week maximum cycles of develop, test, implement.
And quick question there: are we now writing, the automated testing when that is that?
Not enough, Liam.
That's the
not enough.
That's the goal. That's the ideal.
Yes, it is. It is the ideal. I think it's certainly an opportunity to write those tests. The difficulty is that writing the tests isn't as quick and as easy as lots of us might want.
And often it takes as long as the development itself.
So you're almost doubling the time, doubling the cost.
It could take longer.
And for customers, that's not necessarily an easy sell.
Let's just break that down because it can take longer. Yes, the first test for instance, if you take a sales order cycle of creating a sales order, posting it, and so on, the first test you write, will take a long time, hours, possibly days if you've got lots of bits and pieces. But then picking up that test and changing 3 parameters and doing it again will take you 10 minutes. So
it's long-term gain, isn't automated testing.
The problem is that everybody looks, you've got to get that over that initial mountain of getting the first test developed in a particular area. Once you've done that first test, to do all the permutations. Now, if you do a manual testing cycle, typically every time you go around that testing cycle, it takes the same period of time. So the more permutations you want to test of anything, the more beneficial automated testing is. So, for us, the warehousing processes, the distribution processes, absolutely, because am I testing a pick which has got three lines of the same item from different bins? This one's got a item tracking on, this one hasn't, this one's coming from this zone, this one's coming from this.
And doing that manually
to set the data up can take you 15 minutes each time to just get the data right. Then you process it through, find something that's wrong that you realise is a data setup. So you then have to do the 15 minutes again to try it through again without changing a line of code, just because you didn't realise that that bin hadn't got that max quantity in the right way and all the rest of it. So that's where the longer your manual testing cycle, the more automated testing works. If your manual testing cycle takes you 5 minutes to check something, doing an automated test, it's going to be a long time before that pays off. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but it is going to be a long time before it pays off. If you're doing the automated testing cycle, if you're doing a manual testing cycle and that manual test is taking you 10 minutes to find some data in your test system that's a snapshot of your live from a month ago, and then run the test through and then find another piece, another item that's got quantity in stock and in the right location and all the rest of it. That's where I think that once you've done the And I think actually one thing that I think we've got to do better is we've got to tell the client when we've run an automated test and it's passed. At the moment, we only tell the client when we run the automated test and it fails. And actually, it doesn't fail that often because we're quite good at what we do. So actually, they pay all this money for developing automated tests and then don't really see the fact that they're getting benefit from it. So I think there's a psychology thing there of everybody realising quite what a benefit automated tests are. People very rapidly forget quite how painful manual testing comprehensively was. When they haven't done it for a few months, they're like, they move on. But we perhaps need to emphasise that, and your tests need to be, every time you update, you do that CR to change something, really you need to look at how your tests need to change to do it. When a bug comes in, classical theory, when a bug's reported, you write the test and then you...
If you're on SaaS and you're getting monthly updates, then having automated tests on key processes is really important, because realistically, you're not going to test your full system end-to-end every month. You're not. It's just not going to happen.
Let's just be clear though, automated tests don't... You still have to create the sandbox and go in and just do a visual check. The automated tests,
it doesn't replace,
as far as I'm aware, doesn't replace just because it'll ensure that the field is on the page. It doesn't ensure that it looks like it's in the right place. And
just part of the
good.
Part of the puzzle.
It's part of the cycle. Not
it minimises some risk, I think, particularly when you're on SaaS and you're having these very regular updates. If you've got key customizations, I think
there are some challenges. So we're doing more and more with Power Platform and D365 integration. How do you write an automated test that goes right across that piece? Web service integration as well, where you're linking up to FedEx or an EDI system or some pricing system or stock availability system from a third party.
Integrations are the hardest things to test, regardless of the method, aren't they? They are, just having test environments of the systems that you're trying to integrate with,
which you don't always
can
get,
be really challenging.
Yeah, some of the third-party carriers don't give you test environments.
Or it's quite.
Or it's worse, the test systems are actually out of line with live. Yeah. So you test it against the test system.
Yeah.
Mentioning no names, DPD. And then you transfer to live and it doesn't work the same way, and they go, oh yeah, that's been like that for a while. So it's it does make it hard. But I think but like the rest of our world has evolved and evolved quite rapidly. If you look back five or more years, I'm sure this will evolve as well. So anything else?
So I think if you haven't had the app ready process done, then that would be the first thing to do, so you understand where you are. Maybe we should say, if you've got to the end of this podcast and you mention that, we give you a little bit of discount on your on your app ready.
Discount. God.
Discount. If you manage to get to the end of this podcast, then mention it and we'll see.
I think like I said, the number of clients who are going through this process, it's now almost the exception that's stuck back on legacy and has no plans. Which is, I think in the business world today where there's such rapid change. And my question, again, visiting that client yesterday, using the Windows client, that was BC14. I'm, in a world of full employment, are your best people going to hang around if your systems are stuck back in what everybody sees as slow and clunky land? I would question the business decision making around. It's not just the system; it's customers and staff, especially, are increasingly expecting a level of this is normal, and I'm afraid where NAV was 10 years ago,
Yeah,
it's not now regarded as
customers say to me
normal.
all the time, we're just not a technology-led company. But really, can you afford not to be? Can you afford not to have some people in your organisation that understand the value of the systems and the technology that's
Well, I think it's, what you're also saying is the next generation. I sound really old now, but the people who are now managing most organisations have grown up with this stuff, and actually won't accept the fact that it's not fit for purpose. And you wouldn't accept a machine in your factory that only works 1 in 4 times that you press the button, or makes you do a massive extra process every time you run it through a cycle. Why would you expect software? Just because software's not something you can see doesn't mean it has value. I think that the days of people regarding systems of less value just because they can't physically see it, it can make an enormous difference to your organisation. And the more you scale, if you have ambition to scale or even keep the same, it's also defence. I think the other thing that you see is the competition is not standing still, not for us, not for our clients, and so the expectation of what is normal today, and the expectation is very different from even 5 years ago. People, clients, they expect to contact you and they expect to have an answer. And if you've got to do 2 hours work to get that answer every time, you're going to be very efficient. Those that are, think, right, we'll just continue using this system for the next decade and then I don't care, is probably the attitude for some. Have a plan, please, because it's all the people you're going to leave behind in that business are going to need it. Oh, that's a sober note. Anything else on that BC14?
No, we're good, I think. It's good to do an update. As I say, we've had good numbers on the last one, so people must be finding it useful. I think just have a refresh is always good. So thanks.
Yeah, it has evolved on, I think. Lovely. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
And see you on the next one.
Thanks.